Doctor, please! The shrapnel in my spine, the pain!
Ma'am, I need you to stop this theatrics.
Doctor ignored female veteran's pain. Then her Marine son brought his platoon. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop the theatrics. Dr. Patricia Hawkins said, clipboard clutched like a shield as she stared down at Staff Sergeant Rhett, Carmen Rodriguez. The morphine drip had been disconnected for 6 hours, but Carmen's military bearing kept her from screaming barely. Doctor, please! Carmen's voice cracked despite her training. The shrapnel in my spine, the pain is exactly what we'd expect from someone seeking narcotics. Hawkins interrupted her pen, clicking impatiently. 2 purple hearts or not, ma'am? I've seen this behavior before. Carmen's weathered hands gripped the bed rails as another wave of agony crashed through her body. 21 years of service, 4 combat tours, and this civilian doctor was treating her like a common addict. When her phone buzzed with Marcus's text, she could barely type, "Need help? They think I'm lying." 3 words that would bring 30 Marines to Richmond General Hospital and change everything. Dr. Patricia Hawkins hadn't always been cynical about pain medication. Fresh out of residency 15 years ago, she'd believed every patient's story, prescribed with compassion, and watched as her naive generosity contributed to 3 overdose deaths in her first year. The lawsuits, the medical board review, and the crushing guilt had transformed her into someone who viewed every pain complaint through the lens of potential addiction. I'm not the villain here, she often told herself during staff meetings about the opioid crisis. I'm preventing more tragedies. But the truth was more complex. Her father's death from prescription drug addiction when she was in medical school had created blind spots in her clinical judgment that she'd never acknowledged even to herself. Richmond General Hospital's emergency department reflected America's broader struggle with pain management in 2025. The institutional memory of pill mills and overdose epidemics had created protocols that often punished legitimate sufferers while attempting to prevent drug abuse. For veterans like Carmen, whose combat injuries required ongoing pain management, civilian hospitals had become minefields of suspicion and institutional bias. Carmen Rodriguez had earned her pain through 21 years of military service that included 3 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. Her final mission had been escorting a medical convoy through Fallujah when the IED exploded, killing her driver and embedding metal fragments throughout her lower spine. The Army surgeons had been clear removing the shrapnel risk paralysis, but leaving it meant a lifetime of chronic pain that would require careful management. Sergeant Rodriguez, the military doctor, had explained with the precision that military medicine demanded, "Your service-connected disability rating reflects the severity of your condition. Civilian doctors need to understand that your pain management isn't optional. It's medically necessary for your quality of life." But civilian doctors like Hawkins saw a middle-aged Latina woman whose precise medical vocabulary and calm demeanor suggested rehearsed drug-seeking behavior rather than the military training that had taught her to communicate clearly under stress. Marcus Rodriguez, now corporal with 2nd Battalion 1st Marines, had inherited his mother's strength and his father's stubborn loyalty. At 23, he'd already completed 2 deployments to Syria, earning his stripes through competence rather than connections. His platoon at Quantico had become his brotherhood, 30 Marines who'd trained together, deployed together, and forged bonds that transcended traditional friendships. Rodriguez, your mom's the one who raised you to be the Marine you are. Staff Sergeant Jackson "Tank" Williams had told him during their last deployment, "If she needs us, we're there, no questions asked." The call came during a training exercise, Marcus's phone vibrating insistently in his cargo pocket. One look at his mother's message and his world shifted from routine military training to personal emergency. The woman who'd never asked for help, who'd raised him alone after his father's death in Afghanistan, was reaching out in desperation. "Tank," Marcus called to his squad leader, his voice carrying the urgency that Marines recognized immediately. "I need to make a call. Family emergency." The platoon's response was immediate and unconditional. These weren't just fellow Marines, they were brothers who understood that military families faced battles on multiple fronts. And sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the civilian institutions that were supposed to serve those who'd served their country. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Miguel Santos had seen enough military medical records to recognize the difference between legitimate pain management and drug-seeking behavior. "Brother, if your mom's being treated like an addict when she's got documented combat injuries, we've got a problem that needs fixing. Mom, tell me exactly what they said to you." Marcus's voice was steady, but his knuckles were white as he gripped his phone in the Quantico barracks. The training exercise had been suspended the moment his squad leader saw his face change. Carmen's voice was barely above a whisper, pain making every word an effort. "She looked at my medical records, Marcus, my DD-218 and my Purple Hearts, everything. Then she said, 'Ma'am, we see patients like you every day, military personnel who become dependent on pain medication and fabricate elaborate backstories to justify their addiction.'" The words hit Marcus like enemy fire. His mother, the woman who'd carried wounded soldiers under fire, who'd earned her stripes through blood and courage, was being treated like a criminal by someone who'd never worn a uniform. "Did you tell her about the shrapnel, the medical necessity documentation from Walter Reed?" Marcus asked, though he could already guess the answer. "I tried, baby. I showed her everything. She said military doctors overprescribe to keep soldiers functional. That doesn't mean the prescriptions are medically appropriate." Carmen's voice broke on the last words. "Marcus, I've been without my medication for 8 hours. The pain is, I can't. I'm coming, Mom, and I'm bringing backup." Marcus's training kicked in as he began mentally organizing a mission unlike any he'd ever planned. "Tank Santos Chen emergency muster right now." Staff Sergeant Williams appeared within seconds, his experienced eyes reading Marcus's expression immediately. "What do you need, Rodriguez?" "My mother's being denied pain medication at Richmond General. The doctor thinks she's drug-seeking despite her combat injury documentation. She's been without meds for 8 hours, and her condition is deteriorating." Tank's jaw tightened. He'd met Carmen Rodriguez during Family Day, had seen her Purple Heart medals, and heard her stories about carrying wounded Marines to safety. "How many do you need?" "Everyone who can get leave," Marcus replied without hesitation. "This isn't just about my mom. This is about how civilian institutions treat our families when we're not there to protect them." Hospital Corpsman Santos was already pulling up Carmen's medical records on his tablet, cross-referencing her service record with her documented injuries. "Brother, your mom's case is textbook service-connected disability. Her injury pattern, her pain management history, everything's legitimate. This doctor's either incompetent or biased. Probably both, Lance Corporal David Doc Chen added grimly. I've seen this before with my own family. Civilian doctors who think military training makes us all drug addicts or potential terrorists. The planning session was conducted with military precision. Tank coordinated with base administration to arrange compassionate leave for platoon members. Santos compiled medical evidence and prepared educational materials about combat injuries. Chen researched Richmond General's policies and identified key personnel who might be sympathetic to veteran issues. We're not going in there as an angry mob, Marcus made clear as his Marines gathered around him. We're going as professional advocates for a decorated veteran who's being denied appropriate medical care. Our mission is education, not intimidation. Corporal Alex Ryder Thompson raised his hand. What's our backup plan if they refuse to listen to reason? Marcus's smile was grim but determined. Then we escalate through proper channels. Media, veteran advocacy groups, congressional representatives, whatever it takes. My mother didn't survive 3 combat tours to be defeated by one ignorant doctor. The transportation was arranged within an hour. 10 Marines in personal vehicles, coordinated convoy movement from Quantico to Richmond. The remaining platoon members would provide support through social media veteran networks and communication with military medical professionals who could provide expert testimony if needed. Rodriguez, Tank said as they prepared to depart, "Your mom raised a hell of a Marine. Time to show these civilians what that means." The drive to Richmond took 2 hours. 2 hours during which Marcus wrestled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. His mother was suffering while he sat helpless in traffic, trusting that her military discipline would keep her alive until help arrived. The emergency department of Richmond General fell silent when 10 Marines in dress blues walked through the automatic doors. Their ribbons told stories of combat deployments, their bearings spoke of professionalism under pressure, and their coordinated movement suggested this wasn't a social visit. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice trembling slightly as she took in the sight of America's finest standing in formation in her lobby. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied with military courtesy that somehow carried an undertone of absolute determination. "I'm Corporal Rodriguez. I'm here about my mother, Carmen Rodriguez, who's currently being denied appropriate pain medication for her service-connected injuries." Dr. Hawkins appeared from behind the nurses' station, her defensive posture immediate and obvious. "Corporal, your mother is receiving care according to our standard protocols. Military service doesn't entitle patients to special treatment or exemption from medical procedures." "Ma'am, with respect," Tank interjected, his sergeant's voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in uniform, "we're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for appropriate treatment based on documented medical conditions and service-connected disabilities." Hawkins's response revealed the depth of her institutional bias. "Staff Sergeant, I understand your loyalty to fellow service members, but medical decisions cannot be influenced by emotional appeals or military solidarity. This patient exhibits classic drug-seeking behavior patterns regardless of her claimed service record." "Claimed service record?" Santos stepped forward, his medical training and combat experience evident in his bearing. "Doctor, this woman has 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star with V device. Her injuries are documented through military medical channels, and verified by VA disability ratings. Are you suggesting that the United States military falsified her service record? I'm suggesting, Hawkins replied with growing defensiveness, that military medical practices often prioritize mission readiness over long-term patient welfare. Overprescription of narcotics is common in military settings. Marcus felt his temper rising, but maintained his professional composure. Doctor, may I ask about your experience treating combat injuries, your familiarity with IED blast patterns, your training in military medical protocols? The question hit its mark. Hawkins had never treated a combat veteran, had never seen the aftermath of roadside bombs, had never understood that military medicine dealt with injuries that civilian doctors rarely encountered. Her expertise was emergency medicine, not battlefield trauma. My experience is in emergency medicine and pain management, she replied stiffly. I don't need military experience to recognize drug-seeking behavior. Dr. James Morrison appeared from his administrative office, drawn by the commotion and the sight of military personnel in his emergency department. As a former Navy flight surgeon, he immediately understood the situation's complexity and potential explosiveness. Gentlemen, I'm Dr. Morrison, Chief of Emergency Medicine. Perhaps we could discuss this situation in my office. His intervention was diplomatic but firm, recognizing that the confrontation was escalating beyond productive communication. Sir, Marcus replied with military respect for senior authority, we appreciate your willingness to discuss our concerns. Our mission is simple: ensure that a decorated combat veteran receives appropriate medical care for documented service-connected injuries. The meeting that followed in Morrison's office was tense but illuminating. Marcus presented his mother's complete medical history, including classified mission reports that documented the circumstances of her injuries. Santos provided medical analysis that supported Carmen's pain management needs. Tank offered character testimony about Carmen's service and sacrifice. Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. Dr. Hawkins, based on this documentation, I'm ordering immediate resumption of appropriate pain management for Mrs. Rodriguez. Her injuries are clearly documented, her medical history is consistent, and her treatment has been inadequate. But Hawkins wasn't finished fighting. Dr. Morrison, if we reverse our pain management protocols every time family members complain, we'll return to the epidemic conditions that created these policies in the first place. Patricia, Morrison replied with growing firmness, this isn't family complaint. This is documented military medical necessity, supported by VA disability ratings and combat injury verification. Your assessment was incomplete and potentially discriminatory. The institutional resistance was becoming clear. Hospital policies designed to prevent drug abuse were being applied indiscriminately, punishing legitimate patients while protecting the institution from liability. Carmen's military service, rather than being honored, was being viewed as a risk factor for addiction. Dr. Hawkins, Chen said quietly, his intelligence background evident in his analytical approach, if I may ask, what percentage of your veteran patients receive appropriate pain management on first presentation? The question was tactical and devastating. Chen had researched the hospital's treatment patterns and identified systematic bias against military patients that went far beyond Carmen's individual case. Hawkins's inability to answer revealed what everyone suspected: she'd never tracked her treatment of veterans, had never examined her own biases, had never considered that her father's addiction might be influencing her medical judgment. "Dr. Morrison," Marcus said with military directness, "our concern extends beyond my mother's immediate care. We're seeing systematic discrimination against veterans throughout this institution. That's a problem that needs comprehensive solution." The escalation was complete. What had begun as one family's medical emergency was revealing institutional bias that affected every veteran seeking care at Richmond General. The Marines' intervention was becoming a catalyst for examining deeper problems that hospital administration had preferred to ignore. The confrontation exploded when Carmen's vital signs triggered the cardiac monitor alarms. Her blood pressure had spiked to 210/130, her heart rate was racing at 165 beats per minute, and her oxygen saturation was dropping as pain-induced stress overwhelmed her cardiovascular system. "Code Blue Room 314. The intercom crackled, but Dr. Hawkins's response was more defensive than medical. "This is manipulative behavior," she announced to the nursing staff loud enough for Marcus to hear through the doorway. "She's escalating her symptoms because her family brought pressure. This is exactly what drug seekers do when standard protocols don't produce desired results." Marcus pushed past the nurses, trying to keep him out of his mother's room. The sight that greeted him was devastating. Carmen's face was gray with pain, her body rigid with muscle spasms, and her breathing shallow and labored. The woman who'd carried wounded Marines under fire was being destroyed by untreated agony. "Mom, I'm here," he whispered, taking her hand despite the nurse's protests. "Help is coming." Carmen's voice was barely audible. "Marcus, I can't. The pain is... everything's going dark." Dr. Morrison burst into the room, took one look at the monitors, and began issuing rapid orders. "Get me morphine 4 mg IV push now. Prepare for cardiac monitoring. Someone call cardiology consult." "James, she's exhibiting classic drug-seeking escalation." Hawkins protested, but Morrison cut her off with surgical precision. "Patricia, this patient is in hypertensive crisis from untreated pain. Her documented injuries are causing systemic stress that could trigger stroke or cardiac arrest. We're treating the medical emergency, not debating addiction theories." But even as Morrison worked to stabilize Carmen, Hawkins continued her psychological interpretation. "You're enabling addictive behavior patterns. These patients learn to manipulate medical staff through dramatic presentations." Santos stepped forward, his medical training combining with his protective instincts. "Doctor, I've treated blast injuries in combat zones. This woman's pain presentation is consistent with her documented shrapnel pattern. What you're calling manipulation is actual physiological distress." The darkest moment came when Carmen's heart rhythm became irregular, the monitor showing dangerous arrhythmias that could rapidly deteriorate into cardiac arrest. The woman who'd survived multiple IED attacks was dying in an American hospital because civilian medical staff couldn't distinguish between legitimate medical need and drug-seeking behavior. "Mom, stay with me," Marcus pleaded, his military composure finally cracking as he watched his mother slip toward unconsciousness. "You've survived worse than this. Don't let them win." Tank pulled Marcus aside, his voice carrying the wisdom of 3 decades in combat zones. "Brother, your mom's tougher than any enemy we've faced, but she needs you to be her advocate, not her son right now. Get your head in the mission." The psychological impact was devastating for everyone involved. Marcus watched his mother suffer from preventable medical neglect, his faith in civilian institutions shattered by witnessed cruelty disguised as medical protocol. Tank and Santos coordinated with base medical personnel to provide real-time consultation about Carmen's condition. Chen documented everything for potential legal action and media exposure. Hawkins's defensive reaction revealed the depth of her psychological investment in being right rather than providing appropriate care. "This family is manipulating all of you," she told Morrison privately. "Military personnel are trained in psychological operations. They know exactly how to present symptoms for maximum emotional impact." Morrison's response was swift and final. "Patricia, you're off this case immediately. Your personal biases are interfering with medical judgment and endangering a patient's life." But the damage was expanding beyond Carmen's immediate crisis. Other Marines were calling their families, describing the discrimination they'd witnessed. Social media posts were appearing with photos of Carmen's service records contrasted with her medical treatment. The story was going viral among veteran communities who recognized systematic problems in their own healthcare experiences. The institutional crisis deepened when Carmen's condition required intensive care unit admission. The woman who'd entered the hospital with manageable chronic pain was now fighting for her life because medical staff had criminalized her suffering rather than treating her injuries. "Dr. Morrison," Marcus said with deadly calm as they watched Carmen being transferred to ICU, "my mother could die because your staff decided that Purple Hearts were less credible than their own prejudices. This isn't just medical malpractice. This is institutional betrayal of someone who bled for this country." The moment crystallized everything wrong with civilian treatment of veterans. Carmen Rodriguez, who'd risked her life to save others, was being killed by the very system she'd sworn to protect. The irony was crushing, and the injustice was complete. But Marcus had learned something from his mother's military service. Sometimes the darkest moment was when you discovered who you really were and what you were willing to fight for. Dr. Morrison took direct control of Carmen's ICU care, his Navy flight surgeon background immediately evident as he issued precise orders for pain management and cardiac stabilization. "This patient receives appropriate analgesic therapy immediately. I don't want to hear any more discussion about addiction protocols until she's medically stable." The response was dramatic and medically conclusive. Within 30 minutes of receiving proper pain medication, Carmen's vital signs began normalizing. Her blood pressure dropped to manageable levels, her heart rate stabilized, and her breathing deepened as the stress response finally began to subside. Dr. Santos observed quietly to Morrison, "The response pattern confirms legitimate pain management needs. No drug-seeking patient would show this kind of physiological improvement from appropriate medication." Morrison nodded grimly. "Carmen, you're absolutely right. This patient's near-death experience was completely preventable. We failed her in every way that a medical institution can fail." Marcus stood beside his mother's ICU bed, watching color return to her face for the first time in 12 hours. "Mom, can you hear me?" Carmen's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her son with clarity that had been absent during her crisis. "Marcus, you came." "I brought the whole platoon, Mom. We don't leave our people behind." The transformation extended beyond Carmen's immediate medical care. Morrison called an emergency department staff meeting, Tank and Santos, joining him to provide education about military service combat injuries and the unique healthcare needs of veteran populations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, "what happened to Mrs. Rodriguez represents systematic failure in our approach to veteran care. This decorated combat veteran nearly died because we applied addiction protocols to legitimate medical conditions." Tank stepped forward, his 30 years of military service lending weight to every word. "Dr. Morrison, with your permission, I'd like to explain what military service actually means and why Mrs. Rodriguez's injuries are different from typical civilian pain complaints." The presentation that followed was both educational and emotionally powerful. Tank described Carmen's Bronze Star action, carrying 3 wounded Marines to safety under heavy fire while suffering her own injuries. Santos explained the medical complexity of blast injuries and why military pain management differed from civilian protocols. Marcus shared the personal impact of watching his mother be treated like a criminal when she needed healing. Dr. Hawkins attended the meeting, her defensive posture gradually giving way to uncomfortable recognition. I didn't understand the context of her injuries," she admitted quietly. "My training focused on identifying addiction patterns, not on military medical history." Dr. Morrison replied with measured firmness, "Your training was inadequate for treating veteran populations. That's an institutional failure, not just a personal one. We're implementing comprehensive changes to prevent future incidents." The hospital's commitment to change was immediate and comprehensive. A veteran healthcare coordinator position was created and filled by a former military medical officer. All emergency department staff were required to complete military cultural competency training. Pain management protocols were revised to include specific provisions for service-connected injuries. Carmen's recovery accelerated once she received appropriate care and respectful treatment. "The pain is manageable now," she told Marcus during his daily visits. "But more importantly, they're treating me like a human being instead of a criminal." The breakthrough moment came when Carmen addressed the hospital staff during a mandatory training session, her testimony carrying the moral authority of earned experience. "I didn't serve my country for 21 years to be treated with suspicion when I needed medical care. I served to protect the institutions and freedoms that make America great." Her voice strengthened as she continued, "All I asked for was dignity and appropriate treatment for injuries sustained in that service. Instead, I was nearly killed by people who couldn't see past their own prejudices to recognize legitimate medical need." Dr. Hawkins approached Carmen after the session, her professional pride warring with personal accountability. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. My assumptions about your case were wrong, and my treatment nearly cost you your life." Carmen's response reflected the grace that military service had taught her. "Doctor, I don't need apologies. I need assurance that other veterans won't face what I experienced. Can you give me that?" "Yes, ma'am," Hawkins replied, her voice carrying newfound respect. "I'm enrolling in additional training about veteran health care and combat injury treatment. This won't happen again." The media attention reached national levels when Marcus appeared on several veteran advocacy programs, his articulate explanation of the incident resonating with military families nationwide. "My mother's case wasn't unique," he explained to interviewers. "Veterans face discrimination in civilian health care because providers don't understand military service or combat injuries. The hospital's legal exposure was significant, but Carmen's desire for systematic change rather than personal compensation led to a settlement that funded comprehensive veteran health care improvements. "I don't want money," she told the lawyers. "I want assurance that no other veteran will nearly die from medical prejudice." Richmond General Medical Center became a model for veteran healthcare excellence. The training programs developed there were adopted by hospitals throughout Virginia and neighboring states. Carmen's case became a catalyst for federal legislation requiring veteran cultural competency training for all healthcare providers receiving federal funding. Marcus's leadership throughout the crisis earned recognition from his chain of command and accelerated his promotion timeline. Rodriguez, his commanding officer, told him, "Your advocacy for your mother demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership the Corps needs. You balanced family loyalty with professional excellence." The platoon's cohesion and effectiveness throughout the intervention became a testament to military values applied to civilian challenges. "We deployed for Carmen Rodriguez, just like we'd deploy for any mission," Tank explained to visiting officers studying the case. "Military families are our responsibility, whether the threats come from foreign enemies or domestic institutions." Carmen's transformation from victim to advocate was complete and inspiring. She began working with veteran organizations to educate healthcare providers and advocate for policy changes. "My pain nearly killed me," she would tell audiences, "but it also revealed a problem that affects thousands of veterans. If my suffering can prevent others from facing the same discrimination, then it had purpose." The final ceremony was held at Richmond General, with Carmen being honored by hospital administration, her military service formally recognized, and her advocacy acknowledged as catalyzing positive change. The woman who'd been dismissed as a drug-seeking patient was celebrated as a decorated veteran whose courage had transformed healthcare for countless others. Dr. Morrison's closing remarks captured the institutional transformation. "Mrs. Rodriguez's case taught us that our mission extends beyond treating symptoms to honoring the service and sacrifice of those who protected our freedoms. This hospital is better because of her courage and her family's advocacy." Marcus stood beside his mother as she received the hospital's award for patient advocacy, his pride evident but tempered by understanding that their fight was part of a larger battle for veteran dignity and recognition. "Mom," he said quietly, "Dad would be proud of how you fought back." Carmen smiled, her hand touching the Bronze Star pin on her lapel. "Marcus, I learned something important through all this. Military service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in hospital rooms and boardrooms, not foreign battlefields." The legacy was clear and lasting. Carmen Rodriguez had transformed personal suffering into institutional change, proving that individual courage could create systematic reform when supported by effective advocacy and unwavering commitment to justice. The Carmen Rodriguez Protocol became the gold standard for veteran healthcare at Richmond General Medical Center and inspired comprehensive reforms throughout the Virginia healthcare system. The multifaceted approach included mandatory veteran cultural competency training for all healthcare providers, revised pain management protocols that recognized service-connected injuries as legitimate medical conditions requiring specialized understanding, and the creation of veteran patient advocate positions to ensure appropriate treatment and prevent future discrimination. The immediate consequences were transformative for both individual patient care and institutional culture. Within 6 months, Richmond General's veteran satisfaction scores improved by 340%, while pain management complaints from military patients dropped to virtually zero. The hospital's reputation within the military community shifted from problematic to exemplary, with veteran families specifically requesting treatment at the facility that had learned from its mistakes. Carmen's transformation from dismissed patient to respected veteran advocate created a new model for healthcare activism that inspired similar efforts nationwide. Her testimony before congressional committees on veteran healthcare discrimination led to federal legislation requiring cultural competency training for all healthcare providers receiving federal funding. The Carmen Rodriguez Military Healthcare Protection Act established standards that protected veteran rights while providing resources for appropriate treatment of service-connected conditions. Marcus's leadership throughout the crisis demonstrated the effectiveness of military training applied to civilian advocacy and social justice issues. His ability to coordinate multiple interventions simultaneously, maintain professional composure under extreme stress, and achieve mission objectives despite institutional resistance proved that military skills translated directly to veteran advocacy and community service. His subsequent promotion to staff sergeant was accelerated in recognition of his exceptional leadership during family crisis. The platoon's intervention became a case study in military unit effectiveness applied to civilian challenges that required coordinated action and strategic thinking. Their ability to work as a unified force, support each other through crisis, and maintain focus on mission objectives while respecting civilian authority demonstrated why military training was valuable in high-stress situations requiring diplomatic solutions and systematic change. Dr. Morrison's leadership during the crisis and subsequent reform implementation established Richmond General as a national model for veteran healthcare excellence. His background as a former military medical officer proved crucial in bridging civilian and military medical cultures, while his willingness to acknowledge institutional failures and implement comprehensive changes demonstrated that healthcare leadership could evolve and improve when confronted with evidence of systematic bias. The broader impact extended throughout American healthcare as the Department of Veterans Affairs partnered with civilian hospitals to develop comprehensive veteran care standards that ensured appropriate treatment regardless of where veterans sought medical attention. The initiative created seamless networks of healthcare providers trained to understand and address veteran-specific needs, improving outcomes while reducing discrimination and institutional bias. Carmen's long-term legacy was profound and multi-generational. Her story reached military families worldwide, demonstrating that individual advocacy could catalyze systematic change when supported by community action and institutional accountability. The veteran who'd been dismissed as a drug-seeking patient became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the power of speaking truth to authority when justice demanded action. The universal message resonated far beyond military communities. Those who sacrifice for their country deserve medical care that honors their service rather than criminalizes their injuries. And healing is possible when healthcare providers choose understanding over suspicion, compassion over protocol, and respect over discrimination.